Hello, everyone. My name is Christophe Bedard. I am currently a master's student at the University of Toronto in the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. And unfortunately, during my master's, I haven't really had the opportunity to really take advantage of the fact that I am in an institute for studies, and meaning that I haven't produced any studies so far, given my inability to gather quantitative data. However, if anybody interested wouldn't mind lending me or letting me use their data in order to make some, maybe interesting conclusions on certain patterns that can be identified within that data, then I'd be more than willing to put my name on a research article or paper for the sake of producing studies on education. However, I was put in front of this blackboard, which is presumably for one of the many OEC classes which is offered on campus, and it discusses Kant's position on morality, and this will be the subject of the video today. In as much as I can speak on Kant, given my relative unfamiliarity of or with his written text. However, Kant has been cited time and time again as a philosophical justification for certain ethical and moral practices and ways of understanding social processes, etc. And so it is safe to say that he had a very important voice in the development of the legal system or legality in general, and the way we see criminality, as well as responsibility. And that's what I'll be discussing today regarding and looking at the blackboard. It's interesting because you could very much assume that to be a moral philosophy class. However, Kant's view of morality and human responsibility is applicable to much more than just the philosophy itself. It's applicable to economics. It's applicable to sociology, anthropology, psychology, and beyond, or beyond, to the extent to which, or even politically. And so let's start by discussing what Kant sought to be uh, the ought of things. And if you're interested in considering what should be, then I would consider you meditate on the word ought, OUGHT, in regards to what ought to be done. And even the entire building disagrees with me. But it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, the fundamental mechanism of action and doing, right, instead of passivity or stagnation, so maintaining a certain form of actionability onto reality, there's a sense in which you can either say, I have to do this, or there is no should to the action. And what Kant was saying is that in this process of what should be done, there are certain requirements which are found inherently to the ought of the matter, which is the act in the in completion, but the decision and process, it's all form of actionability that humans can assume onto reality, which demand a certain level of responsibility, or at least concomitance to reality, for the action to have any effect. However, again, what Kant was proposing is some categorical imperatives. Is the definition of its ethical system, in as much as he proposes that there are certain things that humans should do in order to achieve their own means in reality, in the most productive of ways, for example. And so I think everybody would agree with that proposition, but even for the people who were reluctant to accept Kant's position at the historical point in his existence, which was in the 1700s in the Germano-Austrian region, um, and so firmly situated in Europe in the 1700s. And he was a representative of the Enlightenment thinking, which were a type of it represented a type of thinking which was found in that period of time, which put a lot of trust on the rational process of thinking in order to resolve problems in reality. And so, in that sense, Kant represented only one of the many voices of the Enlightenment found in Europe um, at that point in time, and and essentially paved the way for a certain type of moral philosophy, which accounts for institutions and structures of collaboration which surrounds us, and the ways to best participate in them in ways which will be conducive to your beneficence and to the beneficence of others, which is the should that Kant proposes, is that what ought to be done is beyond the means of our own self, not only the means, the ends of our own self, and as such um, deserves to be accounted for in what should be done and not what is done. Because what is done is not what should be done always, and what is done can be passed judgment upon, such that it could be judged to be what is done is not done properly and should have been done in this way. And that's kind of one of the main error identification mechanisms we've developed in order to ascertain errors in a system, is which part of the system produces results which are not concomitant to the expected results, what should have been. And once that is resolved, then the system can be considered to function normally or effectively on the basis of assumption of result. And so if you're interested, if you have some form of knowledge in computer programming, for example, then I challenge any student at OIC currently who have familiarity with programming to try to develop a simple system of actionability towards certain internet situations, for example. So that is to say, if you develop, well, you could call it an artificial intelligence, but a system which reacts to the image on your screen every time it perceives an advertisement for money, such that every time an advertisement for money is perceived, it clicks on it, so that the expected result of that program onto the functioning of your computer is to have access to as many of these portals towards money that your computer is allowed to be to observe. Might be a completely useless program, but that is to say that it would give you a good understanding of valuation of certain information on the basis of systematic approach of reduction of importance. And so in that sense, the advertisement and the money is what's most important. And as such, your computer acts outrightly towards the maximization of the amount of money that can be accrued towards maybe a set account that you've that you've opened on the site. And so there's no limit to the actionability and the systematic actionability of systems of production, especially ones which work by themselves, such as a computer. And in that sense, that is the radical proposition of like human collaboration is to that once we arrive at the production of the computer, we are beyond the means of productivity in a material sense, other than to enter function in this machine, which is in fact, largely representative of human capacities, but in an inapproachable way at first to many. And so returning back to Kant, right? If Kant would have lived in 2023 and he would have had access to a computer and the internet, I think he would have had a very different sense of responsibility than what he had when he first devised his systematic thinking, or like a schematics for an ethical structure. However, that coding example was one example I could give in order to understand what type of systematic thinking Kant was applying onto reality, such as to incur the best results kind of deal. Or a specific result nonetheless, but which was motivated by the good of humanity potentially, but fundamentally the good and human rights. And so, what more is there to say on Kant? Categorical imperative is very much one of his attributed ideas. Are there any imperatives at all? Would be my question to ask him, in the sense of saying, who are you to define imperatives which go beyond the means of your personal experience, and as such apply to maybe the human experience in general, which was his goal. Maybe potentially, his goal, in as much as you probably saw his understanding to be reflective of a certain part of the population surrounding him geographically. But the fact that we still discuss Kant's thinking, even to this day, is a testimony to his thinking's ability to go beyond the linguistic, geographical, and cultural norms of his time. And essentially, his comprehension of reality definitely went beyond the geographical and historical situation that he was in. And so again, is that worth taking into account? Categorical imperative is what we take out of it, I think, broad stroke wise, in terms of saying there are things which should be categorically and imperatively acted upon. And he defined it in such and such way, based on certain principles of virtue, which a human being should uphold, which to him was rational, definitely in the condition or in attachment to the Greek philosophy and the legacy of Plato and Socrates and Aristotle on human thinking and on what is defined to be right and equitable and just in a society. And so looking beyond, or obviously beyond meaning behind Kant, you can go back to the Greeks to understand the modes of society and of structures of